Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 11 of Spy Family Season 3. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. You know, I hate to say it, but the opening theme for this season still hasn't really grown on me. I just think it's a little bit too dour and downbeat. But, neither here nor there. Last we left off, Yor got blasted and, maybe embarrassed herself in front of Lloyd a little bit. Maybe not. We'll see. Lloyd's probably not worried about it too much. So, Anya's got a nice day ahead of her. She's going to the zoo with Becky, which, that's always like a nice thing, going to the zoo, seeing all the animals and all that. Especially if, Berlin here has a big zoo, which I imagine they would. Ah, boy. Becky can't help herself. She's already trying to invite Lloyd along, and she still has not internalized her defeat, Yor has already won this engagement. It's over. But I seem to recall, based on the preview at the end of the previous episode, that we were going to get some actual spy stuff going on. So, a couple things are going to be going on here. I'm not sure how the plates are going to be balanced as they spin, but there's some Lloyd and Yor stuff, some embarrassment and all that, and, trying to navigate all that. There's the zoo, and then there's some spy stuff. And if this is where I seem to recall it being in the manga, then I think there's going to be some actual stuff here. Some real consequential stuff, which is now immediately undercut by Yor deciding to make an issue of her own mistaken assumption that Lloyd's mad at her for oversleeping. Her friends have done a number on her, to her detriment. What are we doing here? She's going out of her way to try and find anything to complain about. When you get down to it, having nothing to complain about is probably the state, we should all aspire to. And, for want of a complaint, she just decides to say that she hates everything, which, that's a nothing statement. If someone says, I hate everything, they're obviously mad about something and extrapolating it to everything, and, if diffusing the situation isn't really an option, you can just sort of, ignore that because it's not true. Now, Yuri, the poor guy, he's shown up just in time to cause some trouble. It's not a good time here for him to just suddenly drop by. Yeah, the introduction of Yuri, that's never a good thing, because he's against Lloyd and Yor just in general, even though things were seemingly perfect. But now if Yor's complaining, even in like a really sort of roundabout, vague kind of way, then like I don't know, like he's happy to sort of help her file for divorce and all that, but oh dear. So the trouble is, Lloyd is now thinking of this in terms of being a spy, which is to say, Yuri is now intruding on Operation Strix and jeopardizing it, and therefore, something's gotta be done. You know, obviously he's not gonna, like, kill the guy or anything, but, I don't know, maybe he should do something. Although Yor has now admitted that she's only been unhappy since yesterday. This is really starting to remind me of one of those misunderstandings where just one single little clarifying question would fix everything, like, you know, why are you unhappy? And the answer is, well, my friends told me I should be. I mean, Lloyd's sort of jumping to the conclusion, well, he's not jumping to it, he's deciding not to jump to it, but he concluded that maybe Yor's friends are spies, and frankly, maybe they should be, like, abducted and taken to a black site, because they are, frankly, terrorists to love, really. Okay, no, you probably shouldn't do that. That's a bad thing. They should not be, like, tortured or anything, but I don't know. I feel like there should be at least a stern talking to. You know, there's probably no good way to do that, because Lloyd's not going to get involved to that level, I wouldn't think, and frankly, I don't think Yor has the backbone to, like, tell her friends to shut up. And, you know, even if Yuri had Yor's best interests in mind, I don't think he would have the inclination to do that, simply because he would agree with her friends. Oh dear. Unfortunately, Yor has accidentally demolished her brother by reminding him that she's married. It's never been this over for Yuri, the poor guy. Like, the guy really needs to get a grip on things, because he is, you know, he's basically like a Stasi agent, which is never a good thing to begin with. But when this guy is so involved in his sister's life, I feel like you need to get a hobby, you know? So things are getting real complicated, because I'd be willing to bet the farm on the fact that that phone call was Fiona, and that little emergency code she passed off to Lloyd was like, hey, there's a mission. It never ends. You're saying like, ooh, how could you prioritize helping patients in an emergency over family? It's like, what are we doing here? The guy's, you know, kind of a doctor adjacent. So, like, look, I feel like you kind of just have to be, like, willing to accept it. Otherwise, the thing's just not going to work from Jump Street. So you're satisfied that, like, she's keeping up a good facade, saying, like, oh, we have a normal marriage, but man, like, that's not even enough for Yuri. He's like, yep, someone's cheating. Let's start following. So I think this is the setup for something a wee bit more complex, you know? Because naturally, Yuri has an ulterior motive. If he can catch Lloyd doing something fishy, he can use his Stasi agent powers to imprison him. But what he likely doesn't realize is that Lloyd is probably actually up to some spy stuff. And therefore, as a state security service agent, you know, he kind of does have a vested interest in this, whether he knows it or not. And I suspect once he does realize it, then he might have to balance things of, like, doing his job versus hiding his real job from his sister. You know, this is something I don't think there's necessarily a term for. But essentially, all these things are sort of cascading together, where a variety of motivations and restrictions are all sort of coming together in a big, like, 10-car pileup. Because, I mean, even now, like, the lieutenant, the guy above Yuri is sort of signaling to him that, like, hey, we gotta meet. So, yeah, this leads me to believe that things are sort of hitting the fan in a big kind of way. And I guess we're not going to have like a big cascade whereby Yuri is forced to deal with his sister and his job. But, oh dear. It's deeply unfortunate that it took your following Lloyd to the hospital to come to the conclusion that, I have nothing to complain about, and that it's actually a good thing I have nothing to complain about, and that maybe I should go home instead. We get like a nice little explanatory text box saying she is finally sobered up, so I guess that makes some sense, but like, how absolutely sloshed was she? Like, her friends need to be dealt with. They are truly menaces to decent society. So that emergency code Lloyd received, it was in fact an emergency from Fiona because there's a mole and he's absconded with some information on agents and safe houses and stuff like that. And they're coded, but odds are they're going to be handed off to the other side and, probably swiftly decoded, thereby endangering all the agents. And here we have it. It turns out that there's going to be some direct competition between Lloyd and Yuri's organizations, WISE versus the State Security Service. Yeah, that's not good stuff, because even though this isn't like the conflict between Yuri keeping his job a secret from Yor and actually doing his job, there will be some conflict for Lloyd, because suppose he does come into contact with Yuri. On the one hand, his duty as an agent of WISE is to do his job, secure the information, and, presumably keep witnesses to a minimum. And seeing as how the mole here is perfectly willing to gun people down, including like someone who has no real threat, someone who's already incapacitated, like this is certainly like do or die time. And I guess when you get down to it, the big question is, should it come down to it, should Lloyd kill Yuri to protect the mission? And the answer, unfortunately, is probably yes. However, should he decide to do that, and should it come down to it, I feel like when the time comes, he's going to be a little bit more concerned about Yor and her well-being than would normally be advisable for an agent of his caliber, And like, that's kind of the thing, stereotypically in spy fiction, there's the idea that spies, they do whatever they need to do to get the mission done, but they sort of, keep their feelings to themselves. They don't get involved with people full stop, just because it introduces complexities and things like that make the mission go askew. Unfortunately for Lloyd, due to the nature of his mission, Operation Strix, he kinda had to get a family. And, even as purportedly the greatest spy in the world, I feel like there's only so much you can do living with a woman and a child without becoming at least a little bit attached to them, Like, it's not even a personal failing, I would say. I feel like it's just sort of like ingrained biologically, whereby like if you're put in that situation, you just kind of bond to them a little bit, whether you want to or not. So something tells me things are going to get messy in rather short order. In no small part because there seemed to be a rather large gathering of State Security Service agents. And, those guys, like, based on their rough analog in real life, they don't play nice. And we've already seen the mole kill, 3 people, right? 'Cause he shot the one pursuer, the one person used as a human shield, and then the guy in the car. So, like, them and people aligned with them are clearly not averse to killing, even in broad daylight as that was. So, I mean, sure, the preference is probably to, like, take the mole into their custody and get their hands on the information as quickly and quietly as possible. But if it comes down to getting the information through a firefight or not getting the information at all, then they're probably going to start, shooting guns. So, this other agent, he's sort of bringing up the idea that things are a wee bit delicate, because, there is that sort of Cold War brewing, and any actual armed conflict might spark off a big international incident, and therefore, actual war. Which, neither side really wants, but, there's only so much you can do, The lieutenant also mentioned Twilight by, not by name, but by code name, and he mentioned that this, could be a golden opportunity to catch him. So, I guess that's another thing to be concerned about. The idea that Lloyd is, if not necessarily known, certainly known by reputation and wanted. And for that alone, he should be probably a little bit extra careful, because, I'm sure the state security services, they would want to capture him and interrogate him. That would be, the best thing they could do. But failing that, just, killing him or incapacitating him or preventing him from doing further spy work would probably be an acceptable consolation prize. Because we've seen throughout the series thus far that despite essentially taking on Operation Strix as, the most important thing in the world, he's also constantly getting pulled into other minor things here and there, to the point where it really seems like he's essentially a one-man army holding up the entire intelligence apparatus, and without him, things would just kind of fall apart. So, if they could just, get rid of him, that would be very beneficial for their side. Now, this is interesting, Yuri's made contact with Winston Wheeler the Mole. However, he's also, immediately rattled, because Wheeler recognized him. And, I suppose if they've set up this meeting, it kind of makes sense that Winston would assume that, the guy here at the appointed time and place is an agent. I do find it interesting, however, that Yuri was so seemingly rattled about it, because, that indicates to me that he's nowhere near as seasoned as we were sort of led to believe. Or perhaps I just assumed, I don't know necessarily that we were led to believe it. As far as I know, he doesn't really have a rank, not one worth mentioning, because he is operating under a lieutenant. And lieutenants are, I believe they're technically non-commissioned officers, so not that big in the grand scheme of things. I guess I just sort of assumed that Yuri would have been promoted, because he certainly seems to display a sort of natural aptitude for this sort of thing. Alright, well, back to, spy business. I'm wondering if this is Lloyd in disguise. I wouldn't be surprised if it was, but you never know. He could be anyone. Okay, I think I know what's going on here. The director, the head of the SSS, is, paling around with someone he doesn't normally do, and then a bunch of anonymous armed people sort of come out from the wings. That seems like they've spotted a mole of their own. And I guess they've done the classic thing of providing varying information through varying channels. Therefore, they know who to target when something gets leaked. I guess it is kind of interesting that both sides seem to have moles. However, the SSS seems to be more competent in rooting them out, which I guess this sort of speaks to the idea that, Twilight is really the only competent person, hence why he has to take care of everything, it seems like. Alright, here we go. After that nice big dinner that comprised the spy versus spy stuff, we are now getting dessert in the form of Anya and Becky seeing the animals. Now, unfortunately, Anya was under the misapprehension that she was here to hunt animals. And it's like, where could she have possibly gotten that impression, I mean, I can't remember a time when I didn't know, what the purpose of a zoo was. You go there and you look at all the exotic animals and all the cool things they do, Man, I couldn't imagine, going to a zoo to, poach animals. That would be deeply unfortunate. It's gotta be, a magical thing. To be a kid again, to see all these magnificent creatures for the first time, lions, elephants, crocodiles. I mean, I feel like lions in particular and other big cats would be kind of an interesting thing. Just because, they do sort of behave like house cats too, in a weird, incongruous sort of way. They will, play around with balls and things like that. They will sleep in boxes. The only other thing is that, I've seen tigers, wade into the water when it's really, really hot, and, house cats, generally speaking, won't do that. Okay, why would there be an empty cage? Oh. Okay, so I guess it's a funny little thing where you learn about people. Oh, okay. Alright, we're doing this then. Good old humans bad. Yeah, well, I feel like this isn't necessarily a lesson you need to impart on children, what are we doing here? Yeah, humans cause problems, but humans are also working to fix the problems too. It's not an all or nothing thing. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.